Okay, picking up where I think we left off the other day, which was pages 40, bottom of 48, top of 49. This is the discussion in Bede about the conversion of King Edwin of Northumbria by Paulinus, missionary. And if you remember, we discussed, earlier, Edwin had a visitor, let's say. Might have been a vision, might not have been. And the individual, got Edwin to agree to some things, and he said, when you see this sign, remember this and do what you're asked to do. And the sign is, he puts his right hand on Edwin's head, okay? So then on page 48, right-hand column, Paulinus does the same thing, and Edwin's like, okay, notice he doesn't immediately agree. I got to talk to my advisors and such. So he talks to his priests and such, and I'm going to repeat what I said at the end the other day. Coife, the chief of his priests, says, consider, O king, this new doctrine that is being preached to us. For I say to you truly that as far as I can tell, the religion we have practiced until now has no virtue in it. What does he mean by virtue? He doesn't mean what we think of virtue today as, these kind of good behaviors, good morals. One is loyal, one is true, one is just, one is faithful. Those kinds of things. He doesn't mean that. He means virtue in the old Roman/Latin sense. Power. Power. That's what virtue originally etymologically means. It is a power to do something. Okay? He says, our religion, what? Has no power. All right? Pagan Germanic religion. Belief in Thor and Odin and all those guys. None of your people, and here's why he says why it has no power. In other words, cause and effect. None of your people has devoted himself more diligently to the worship of our gods than I. I am the best servant of our religion there is. And yet there are many who receive greater favors and greater honor from you than I do, and are more prosperous in all their undertakings. So notice his logic here. If our religion was true, if our gods were real, then they would move you, king, to treat me better. Because I'm the best practitioner of our religion. He's saying, and because you don't treat me better, bad on you, O king, they must be powerless. If the gods had any power, they would have helped me more readily, since I have been more careful to serve them. It follows, therefore, in other words, premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. That if on examination, those new doctrines, which are now preached to us, are better and more effective. Notice, not just more effective, but better. If they are morally better than our old doctrines, he says, we should accept those. And another of the king's chief men said, good advice, Coife. And he adds a story. This other advisor. He gives us an image, a verbal word picture. This is how the present life of man, O king, seems to me in comparison with that time which is unknown to us. So, the present life of man, in other words, as we are sucking air, living, breathing, etc., compared to that time which is unknown to us. What's that time? Death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no one returns, Hamlet says. Or tomorrow. I mean, if you think about it, because none of us knows what tomorrow will bring. What else? What other time? How about before us? Not us collectively, us individually. Before I was born. See, we have this notion today, modern, all that kind of stuff. I began when I was conceived. A lot of other belief systems go, no. You began actually long before that. You were only put into that body. And so the idea is, okay, let's run with that for a moment. So where was I before I was put into this body? William Wordsworth wrote a poem, 19th century, called, maybe very, very late 18th century, I think it was 1805. Wrote a poem called Intimations of Immortality. Intimations, ideas, thoughts, kind of immortality. And he looked at an old, worn, ruined abbey, and it made him think, kind of, where was I before I was born? And he goes back to the old kind of idea that Socrates taught, the pre-existence of the soul. And that everybody, Wordsworth kind of thought, Socrates definitely taught this, everybody, if they were asked the right questions, can remember things from before they became embodied. That's why he went around asking people questions. That's why he, according to his dialogues, could go around and start asking an unlearned slave boy questions about geometry and pull the answers of geometry out of that kid's brain who had never studied any geometry. Okay? That's why the Socratic method is so touted. So, this is how the present life of man, O king, seems to me in comparison with that time which is unknown to us, before and after. So this is the image. It's as if you're sitting in your feasting hall with your aldermen, that is, your lords, your military leaders, and things in wintertime. Notice, it's in winter. Okay, this is important. I've only been in England during the summer. Never been there in the winter. I've been in Prague during the winter. It's colder than you can imagine. Well, at least the winter I was there. The 2 weeks I was there. Absolute bitter cold. Right? So you're in your hall, you're feasting, it's wintertime, with a good fire burning in the middle of the hall, and all inside is warm. Okay? And the good fire burning in the middle of the hall, don't think about there are some really expensive houses, you can get online and look at them. They have this nice big fireplace in the middle, and it's a double-sided fireplace, so you can enjoy it from this half of the room and this half of the room. No. An Anglo-Saxon hall, look at it from the top down, would look like this, and there'd be a hole in the ceiling. And in the middle of the hall, like right here, would just be a fire pit. Throw on the wood, light that sucker up. So what's the rest of the hall kind of going to be like? Yeah, there is going to be smoke. It's not all just going to rise up to the top. It's going to do what smoke does. As people move around, they create eddies in the air, and it's, smoky and dusty and etc. So, nice big fire burning inside. Why? Because it's winter. These are not insulated buildings. Single plank, many of them. All right? So, cold inside. Good fire. I'm really having trouble breathing today. Getting good fire burning in the middle of the hall, and all inside is warm. While outside, the winter storms of rain and snow are raging. All right? And the sparrow flies swiftly through the hall, entering in at one door and quickly flying out at another. I always draw this as a window because I always think it's a window, but it's not. It's a door. So a sparrow comes in, it goes out, comes in. While he is within, the winter storms cannot touch him. That is, while the sparrow is in here, what does the sparrow experience? Warmth, light, as much as a sparrow can experience this, the revelry of the people inside, hears the songs being sung, the clanking of the tankards of beer and such. But after the briefest moment of calm, he immediately vanishes out of your sight. Out of the winter and back into it again. So, in a sense, the winter storm raging all around is kind of evocative of what? This is chaos. And here, order. The sparrow comes out of chaos into order. How does he describe it? An instant. And boom, back outside. Just go back, almost any place, for example, for those of you in the Christian tradition in the Old Testament. How is human life described? As a flower that blooms, the sun comes out, boom, it withers. Or grass. We live an infinitesimal amount of time compared to time in general. You're alive today and dead tomorrow. It gives rise to a whole genre of poetry called Carpe Diem poetry. Seize the day. That is, live for today. Why? For tomorrow we die. Okay? So this life of man. In other words, the whole thing, it's a simile. Just as so. So this life of man appears just for a moment. Of what went before or what is to follow, we know nothing at all. Who's the we? Who does he mean?
People who are still alive.
People who are still alive. What else?
Pagans.
Pagans. Okay.
The religious leaders.
He really means everybody. We don't know what comes before, and we don't know what comes after. What is he saying this new doctrine is giving? Think of this door for a moment. It doesn't really work for the image I want to create, because what does it have in it? It's got a window. You could come up here and you can look and you can see maybe about 20 feet that way. And you can come over here and maybe about 20 feet that way, and obviously straight out ahead. You can't see farther than that on either sides. But take the window out, you've just got the door, right? You can't see through the door. What is death? It's, according to this perspective, it's a door. It goes somewhere. This new doctrine does what?
It gives you a window.
It gives you a glimpse. Does it throw it wide open and say, go on out, explore. You can always come back. No. It gives a glimpse. Okay? He says, if this new doctrine contains anything more certain, it seems that we should follow it. Well, anything more certain than we know absolutely nothing would include what? You crack that door 1/8 of an inch. It gives you a little bit. I can see people moving. But with the door closed and no window, it's like, nope, nobody's talking. I can't hear. I don't know anything. He's saying what about their current religion? It's totally silent about what's there. And it's totally silent about what's there. What's he say about this new religion? Well, what does the new religion tell them? Put it in very, very basic terms. If you love Jesus, what? You'll live forever with him in heaven. In what kind of state? Pure joy. That's a little more than what's next. if this were my Tolkien rolling course, I would ask the question, why does Lord Voldemort fear death? How many of you read the Harry Potter novels? A couple of you. Seen the films? More of you, okay. Why does Lord Voldemort fear death?
It's the unknown.
It's the unknown. Guess what? Socrates was talking about that in the 6th century BC. When his friends tried to keep him from drinking the hemlock, the poison, because he'd been sentenced to death, he willfully chooses it. They're like, come on, man, we can get you out of Athens. He's like, why? Well, because you're going to die. He goes, okay, so? What? Don't you? He's like, it's the unknown. Do we normally fear the unknown? I'm seeing heads do this and heads doing this. The next 5 minutes is unknown. Are you afraid to go out? Now, again, I'm not picking on anybody. The last year and a half has created an awful lot of fear, right? COVID has created, my opinion, you don't have to accept it, you can, argue with me all you want, has created an inordinate fear, especially for people in their 20s. Okay? Vaccinated or not, especially for people in their 20s. Why? Because at least before the Delta variant, hardly any of you guys got sick. And if you got sick, it was, the sniffles. Most of you. Yeah, some died. I'm not belittling that, all right? But it's gotten to the point, a study came out just the other day that talked about college students. And it was a pretty big study. It said, most college students now, if they checked on, are you willing to do this, and there's a whole bunch of things, go out to an indoor party with friends, and it's like 65, 68% of people who responded in the study said, no, I'm not willing to go to an indoor party because of fear of COVID, because I think I'm going to die. I have literally seen and known people in their 20s who, for about the last year, didn't want to go out at all. Go get a burger, go whatever, okay? That's inordinate. He's saying this new religion, it gives us a little glimpse. We can pull away that fear a little bit, all right? So, Carpe says, tell us a little more about this religion, okay? And the king orders Paulinus to speak. And then Carpe says, I have long realized, in other words, long before this guy showed up, that our religion is worthless. And yet, what did he continue doing? It's kind of like he kept taking the paycheck. He realized it was totally worthless. And yet he kept doing the job of the chief priest of the religion. The more diligently I sought the truth in a worship, the less I found it. But now I freely confess, such truth shines forth clearly in this preaching. In other words, praise Jesus, and we're all going to become Christians and such. Okay? So the king accepts, etc. All right. One of the reasons I do that section is, even though it's not talked about what the Germanic belief system is, there is an afterlife of sorts. In the Germanic system, you're nodding your head. What is it? You know?
No, I'm just nodding along with you, just listening.
One of the Marvel films.
There's Valhalla, but there's also hell, and then there's gray as hell.
There's Valhalla. Okay. What leads to the emptying? Well, let me back up. Ragnarok. Thor, Ragnarok, right?
Yeah.
It's when Asgard gets destroyed. What's Asgard? It's one of the places of the gods. It's where one of the group of Germanic gods lives, okay? So, according to Germanic mythology, there's going to be, at the end of the world, let's say, this giant conflagration, this giant battle. And that battle is going to be fought by, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to use two of the words that I have up here. Order and chaos. It's going to be fought by the orders of chaos against the orders of order, or the group, people who support order versus the group that supports chaos. So order, that's the gods. Thor, Odin, Frigg, Freya, the whole 9 yards, okay? Humans, living and dead, and pretty much that's it. Okay? So gods and warriors, living warriors and the dead warriors. The dead warriors come back from Valhalla. Hala means hall, Val, of the dead. The hall of the dead. How do you go to Valhalla? You got to die in war, and according to some versions of it, with the sword in your hand. So if you really want to screw somebody in the afterlife, kill them, but just before you do, take the sword or axe or spear out of that person's hand. And that warrior doesn't go to Valhalla. He just goes to hell. H-E-L. Not the Christian idea of hell, burning, flaming brimstone. Hell's just a really cold place that sucks. Think Murfreesboro, dead of, February. Foggy and gloomy and just cold. Just really bad, okay? On this side, you have the frost giants, a.k.a. Loki, Laufey's son, okay? You have the dwarves, you have the elves, you have the Orkneys, and monsters. All right? They're for chaos. They're for order and such. Yes?
How do you spell the orc?
Oh, sorry.
I can't spell it.
I left the C out. Orcneas.
Thank you.
It's where Tolkien gets the word orcs from, okay? So, I'm not going to talk about how Ragnarok is set into place because of Loki. But Ragnarok starts, and according to most of the versions of the myth, who wins?
They tie.
Nope. Not a tie. There's no, UN negotiated settlement where they win. The forces of darkness defeat the forces of light. Turn off the lights and leave. That's it. So, what does that say about your ideas regarding the future?
Pretty bleak.
Ultimately, it's pretty bleak. Ultimately, it sucks. Everybody dies. The end. No meaning to life. It's the ultimate nihilism. Annihilation. The ultimate, there is no meaning or purpose in life. Period. Okay? That is what's juxtaposed with what Paulinus brings. Okay? That's why, partially at least, Coify says, now let's compare these two stories. Or let's use the mainstream media language. Let's compare these two narratives. You have one narrative that says, ultimately, everything that is good and true and beautiful in the world is destroyed by everything that is ugly, bad, and horrible. And the other one says, no, the good and the true and the beautiful is what will ultimately win. And if you align yourself with that, through Jesus, you will have the world's greatest care for all eternity. The book of Revelation ends with what's called the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's a big old wedding party. Just beer flowing, dead cows and pork and stuff to eat. It's a feast. And we're going to see that idea in some of the poems that we're going to read. Okay? So, which story do you like better? Most people, Coify and his priests go, this one's not very uplifting. This one doesn't end. I kind of like this one. Okay? So, let's go on. What time is it? 9:35. We get out of here at 10:05. 30 minutes. Right? Yeah. Abbess Hills of Whitby. So we're skipping the rest of that until we get to Abbess Hilda was Whitby. Page 51. So, Bede talks about Abbess Hild, who becomes the abbess of the monastery on Whitby, which is on the, I got to keep remembering it, northeast coast of, it's north of East Anglia, it's south of Lindisfarne, of England, okay? So, he talks about how she dies at the age of 66. She spends her first 33 years living most nobly in the secular habit, that is, as a princess, essentially. So she lives her first 33 years as a normal person, okay, nobility, but normal person. And then she spends her last 33 years as a nun. Okay? Cool, fine. Skipping a bunch about her. Talks about her death. Notice, this entire chapter, we can call it, short, but almost this entire chapter is about Hild. All right? It's only towards the end of the chapter that we get mention of the cowherd Cadman. Let me erase this. And we get Bede's discussion of Cadman. So, page 54. Take it back. Might need to go back to very bottom of 53. In Hild's monastery was a certain brother. Today is the 27th, yes. Was a certain brother, specially marked by the grace of God, who used to make pious religious verses, blah, blah, blah. All right? So he begins by giving us this kind of little introduction, which is a summary of Cadman's life. And then he gives us the specifics. He had lived, page 54, left-hand column, second paragraph. He had lived in the secular life until he was well advanced in years and never learned any verses. Therefore, sometimes at feasts, when it was agreed for the sake of entertainment that all present should take a turn singing, when he saw the harp coming towards him, he would rise up from the table in the middle of the feast, go out, and return home. Okay? So, one of the things Anglo-Saxon scholars love about this passage in Bede is it gives us an idea of kind of what seemingly, at least, is a regular occurrence in monastic life, at meals, or at feasts at the very least. Everybody would gather around. Imagine, since there's tables over, desks over here, imagine there's a big long table right down the middle here. And we're all seated around it. Like would happen in what would be called the refectory, where you eat, in a monastery. And he tells us it was the custom for the harp to be passed around. That is, person sitting here, pulls out a harp, starts to strum the harp and recite a song, and then hands it to the next person, who does that and hands it to the next person. Now, while this is happening, beer is also, being consumed. The word that the Old English uses, the word that the Latin uses, that then gets translated into Old English, because Bede is writing in Latin, is yabership. Ship, modern English, ship as in the word fellowship, township, that kind of thing. Drop the GE, bear, beer ship. A party. Okay? This is a fellowship of beer. All right? These are monks. So, the beer's, moving around also. And they didn't drink out of, just little glasses or goblets or whatever. We've got all kinds of bowls that survive from the Anglo-Saxon period that they drank out of. Bowls that would take two hands. And the ale would, nearly fill the bowl, and you'd hold it like this, hands, forearms, kind of chest, and tip it to spill all over, and then you hand it to the next person. So, what are we told Cadman would do? he'd see that harp coming towards him, and he'd leave. Why? We're told. Because he had never learned any verses. He had never learned any songs to sing. Okay? So, one time, this happens. He left the house of feasting, went to the stable, where it was his turn to take care of the animals that night. In due time, he stretched out to rest. That is, he's not like standing guard over the animals, because the animals are all tied up in the stable, the door is closed and such. And so he, lays down on a pile of hay to catch some sleep. A person appeared to him in his sleep. Notice it doesn't say a person woke him up. Cadman, get up. So he's dreaming, or he has a vision, however you want to put it. And the person says, Cadman, sing me something. He doesn't tell him what to sing initially. He just says, Cadman, sing to me. Cadman, I cannot sing. Excuse me. That's why I left the feast and came here, because I could not sing. It doesn't mean he can't carry a tune. It means I don't know how to create a song or a poem on the fly, extemporaneously. All right? Very, very big difference. The man who was talking to him replied, Nevertheless, you must sing to me. And if I remember right, we should have checked before class, the Old English doesn't have the you must part. It's simply a command. Nevertheless, sing to me. Okay? And Cadman's like, what do you want me to sing? Notice once he receives the command, it's okay. You're not going to like it, but. And the other says, sing about the beginning of created things. In other words, sing about creation. At that, Cadman immediately began to sing verses which he had never heard before in praise of God, whose general sense is this. Okay? And I'm going to read the Old English that's on the facing page. Nu schulen herian heaven reaches word, mech todes machta on des modjathunk, werk wuldervader, swahi wunder jahwas, eitja drichten or astelda, he erst schop, jelda bernum, helvan tohrova, hali shippend. Tha middenjard mankinnesward, eitja drichten aftertilda, firum foldan, freya almiti. Okay? That's it in the Old English. Translated, what Bede says, this is the general sense. Okay? We ought now to praise the maker of the heavenly kingdom, the power of the Creator and his counsel, the deeds of the Father of glory, and how he, since he is the eternal God, was the author of all marvels, and first, as almighty guardian of the human race, created heaven as a roof for the sons of men, and then the earth. All right? Now, if you compare that prose version with the poetic translation on the bottom of the next page, they're a bit different. Because every time you do a prose translation, it takes a lot more words. Look at the poetic translation. Now we ought to praise heaven kingdom's guardian, the maker's might, his mind's thoughts, the work of the glory Father, as he of each of wonders, eternal Lord, established a beginning. He first shaped for men's sons heaven as a roof, the holy Creator, then middle earth, mankind's guardian. Eternal Lord afterwards prepared the earth for men, the Lord Almighty. Now, one thing, I'm going to stop talking about Cadman for a moment. If you look at that poem, the main referent, God, keeps getting restated a whole bunch of different ways. Okay? Heaven kingdom's guardian, glory Father, eternal Lord, he, the holy Creator, mankind's guardian, eternal Lord, Lord Almighty. Those are all different ways of just referring to God. But then there are ways of referring to some of the things God does. Okay? The Maker's might, his mind thoughts, those are aspects, attributes, of God. His work, the each of wonders that he created and such. He does various things. So this is what Cadman sings, right? Bede tells us, this is the sense, but not the actual of the order of the words he sang in his sleep. Why? For poetry, no matter how well composed, cannot be literally translated from one language into another without losing much of its beauty and dignity. Little, side pedagogic point on Bede's part. If you really want to know what Cadman sang, you need to know it in Old English. Our problem today is all the Old English versions that we have ultimately derive back from Bede's writing, which was in Latin. And when Bede first recorded the song, he recorded it in Latin. That's why he says, this is the gist of it. It's not the real thing. Okay? So we don't have an actual verbatim copy, if Cadman really existed, a lot of people say he didn't, of what Cadman originally sang. Okay? So, he awakes from sleep. He remembers everything he had sung in his dream. He soon added more verses in the same manner, praising God. In the morning, he goes to the steward, and he says, oh man, I had this amazing dream. But how does he know it's not just a dream? Before he fell asleep, could he sing? No. Now he can. Okay? So he tells the steward what he dreamt. And the steward's like, above my pay grade. Takes him to the abbess. And the abbess says, tell me what you told him. So he tells her. And they all say, got to be a gift from God. Gift from the Lord. They explain to him a passage of sacred history. Before then, they say, we got to test this. Before they all agree it's from the Lord. They say, we got to test this. Why? John the disciple says in one of his letters at the end of the New Testament, test the spirits to see whether they are from God. That is, get proof. So they're going to test it because he said this, this is what happened. So they have him go off with some priests, and the priests tell him some biblical stories. Why do they tell him the biblical stories? Because he doesn't know them. He can't read them for himself. Okay? First of all, the Bible probably at this point is not available in Old English. Not all of the Bible is ever fully available in Old English. Portions of it are. Okay? It is available in Latin, but he can't read. He doesn't know Latin either. So they tell him some stories. They explained to him a passage of sacred history or doctrine and ordered him, if he could, to turn it into verse. He goes away. He comes back the next morning. Boom. He takes the story they told him and he turns it into song. And they're like, praise Jesus. So they start telling him more stories and he starts creating all these songs. And we get a kind of not a listing, but a discussion of the kinds of songs he created. For example, he sang of the creation of the world, the origin of the human race, all the history of Genesis, many verses on the departure of the children of Israel from Egypt, in other words, the Exodus. Okay? Their entry into the promised land. He created poems about the incarnation, the passion, and resurrection of our Lord, of his ascension into heaven, of the coming of the Holy Spirit, Pentecost, the whole 9 yards. Well, lo and behold, there is a manuscript called Junius 11, held at Oxford, that contains poems on all these subjects. Genesis, Exodus, Daniel, the 3 youths in the fiery furnace, the incarnation, the ascension, the advent, etc. Right? And this manuscript used to be called the Cadman manuscript. Used to be. over 100 years ago, well over 100 years ago. When it was thought, initially at least, when it was, realized what this thing was, these are the poems Cadman wrote. This may be Cadman's nobody believes, one, it's written by Cadman, or two, these are the poems Cadman wrote anymore, okay? So eventually he dies, etc. So why talk about all this? Why is this important? Cadman's the first quote-unquote English poet. He's the first poet who composes in English verses that we have that survive, okay? What's more important is he's the first poet in what's called the vernacular tradition. Vernacular just means everyday speech, everyday language. The language people use all the time, all right? He's the first poet in the vernacular tradition to use or to employ Christian ideas. Period. That goes for Latin, Greek, etc. Because it's not the vernacular forms. Okay? But here's what's really important about all that. He takes this pagan Germanic verse form, okay, and he uses it for Christian terms. He uses it for proselytizing. That, not he personally. He doesn't say, I want to talk to you about Jesus and then start, recites his poem that he created. He doesn't do that. Others kind of use it for that. Or others think the poems were for that purpose. I don't think if you read any of the poems that are, supposedly these kinds of poems, you could walk away and go, oh yeah, I entirely see how that could be used to convert people from pagan Germanic ideology, to Christian stuff. So he uses that native Germanic verse form. What does that mean? And this is why he says, I couldn't sing. Gotta open this up. Turn this back on. Projector on. Lay down. I'll come back to this in a moment. We've got a little over 10 minutes. Lights. Off a little. Do I still have that on blackout? No, I don't. Display controls. On. What the? Okay, that's strange. Never seen that before. Turn that off. Now turn it back on. What I'm hoping to show is a document that I have uploaded on D2L. Okay, screw it. Go back up. Go off. And I'll do this instead. Lights. Back on. So, alliteration rules. Germanic poetry is very complex. It follows very hard and fast rules. Not rules in the sense that somebody way back in the midst of time said, this is how all Germanic poetry has to be written. Okay? They're rules that have been derived from an analysis of Germanic poetry that survives from the earliest point. Cadman is really the earliest written Germanic poetry, with very, very few exceptions. There are some runic inscriptions that might be poetry, we're not exactly sure. But even they kind of follow this. up to the middle of the Middle Ages. One of the greatest work of what's called Middle High German is this very, very, very long poem called the Nibelungenlied. Okay? And it follows this perfectly. Okay? So, there are several of these. The first one, every line has 4 stressed syllables. Okay? 2, every line is divided into 2 half lines. Okay? There's a little break, between them, so to speak. Not as they are written in manuscripts, however. If you were to pick up an Old English manuscript, it would be written like that. Everything just goes right, no punctuation for the most part, no capitalization at the beginning of sentences. All right? So, every line kind of divided into 2 half lines. 3, there's not 2 E's in the word each. Each half line has 2 stressed syllables. So 2 in the first half, 2 in the second half, all right? 4, at least, how do I put this one? Yeah, I'll do it this way. This is going to make my list a little longer than the one I've got, I think, uploaded. At least 2, at most 3 stressed syllables must alliterate. Okay? Don't think of alliteration, by the way, in the modern literary conventional sense. Because in the modern literary conventional sense, we say only consonants alliterate. We say if vowels do what? They have assonance. That doesn't apply here. Okay? Vowels can alliterate. Every vowel can alliterate with every other vowel. We'll get to that in a moment. So, at least 2 and at most 3 stressed syllables must alliterate. 5. The 4th stressed syllable never alliterates. Okay? So what does that mean for point 4? The first 2 and the 3rd syllable may alliterate. Now I'm going to add point 6. This is where it gets more complex. The first stressed syllable of the second half line determines the alliteration. Okay? Now you know when Cadman saw that harp coming to him, he took his beer and left. So every line has 4 stressed syllables, every full line. Each line is divided into 2 half lines. Each of those 2 half lines has 2 stressed syllables, right? 2, and at most 3 of those stressed syllables must alliterate. Skip there and go down to here for a minute. The first stressed syllable of the second half line is the syllable that determines all the alliteration for that line. So, if you go back to this, what does that mean? At least one of the syllables in the first half line alliterates with the first syllable of the second half line. And that's because the second stressed syllable there, the first stressed syllable of the second half line, is the one that determines that. Okay? Look at this. This is the Old English for Cadman's hymn. First 4 lines. Nu schulen herion haven reaches where mer todes machta on his modjethunk. Werk wundervader, swahe wunderig was. Echedrichten or astelda. Now, if you look at that, obviously, just looking at it, you can see the alliterative pattern in some lines, right? Ma, ma, ma. All right? What? But a couple lines, it's a little harder to see because there doesn't seem to be any alliteration. Where's the alliteration here? You can't see it. There, and because the first stressed syllable of the second half line is what determines the alliteration, and there has to be at least one alliterating syllable, stressed syllable, in the first half line. That tells you there's one of them. So now we have, you can leave this aside for a moment. Now we have 2 stressed syllables, right? But there has to be 4. 2 of them come in this part, and 2 of them come in this part. So which one? Is it the n in new? Is it the sh in shulan? Or is it what? The on in shulan? No. It's never going to be an unaccented ending syllable. Okay? And usually that accent doesn't fall on conjunctions, pronouns, prepositions, okay, like so and such, or to. They can fall on adverbs, usually fall more on verbs than adverbs. Why? Because verbs carry more meaning than adverbs do. So is it nu shulan herion? Or is it nu shulan herion? You'll find Anglo-Saxon scholars who differ, because we don't have 100% proof as to it. But these, it's a lot easier. It's a conjunction, or it's a, conjunction. It's unimportant. This is pretty unimportant. But yod, it's the middle of a word. It's an unaccented syllable. It's not going to count. All right? Where's the stress here? Is it on the astelda? It can't be. Unless you're going to say and you're going to stress both those. It doesn't work that way. See, that's not a conjunction or anything. It's not a preposition. It's not an adverb. It means beginning. It's a noun. Nouns tend to get stressed. So that's determining the alliteration. So go back over here. Where's another vowel beginning the sentence or beginning a word? Eja. See, A alliterates with ah, or o, or u, or e, kind of a thing. So then what do you do with this? Well, the ah here is a prefix. 99% of the time, you don't stress prefixes. So there's the fourth one. Pretty clear then, it's going to be that. Now you understand why Cadman got up and left? This is not easy to do. He only does it for, 9 lines. Beowulf is 3,182 lines like this. But even in this, that half line gets repeated. And in Beowulf, there are passages, half lines, that get repeated. It's the same idea. It's called a formula. The person is reciting, creating maybe the poem as it goes, and comes to, a passage on the fly that needs to fill out the required thing. And what does the poet do, the composer do on the fly? Drops in a formula, okay, that works that way. If you've ever read, for example, come on, brain, work. Homer's Odyssey, okay, where you have Ulysses and he's traveling, all throughout the Mediterranean. You frequently see the phrase, the wine dark sea, or Athena of the gray eyes. Wine dark sea, of the gray eyes, those are formulas. They're just meant to fill out the line without any other real purpose. Okay, we'll stop there for whatever day it is, Monday. We'll start the Wanderer. Might finish it. I don't think so. I'm still going to try to get some kind of quiz up. I don't remember if I told this class. I know I did my first class. Lost all my files on my home computer, which is the one that had all my files. So I'll have to either make one from scratch. Probably what I'll do is I'll do a quiz over like the stuff for this week. It'll count in the sense that you get whatever points you get. It won't count in the sense that, if it's worth 10 points, that'll be part of the 10 points I divide what you earn the total at the end of the semester. So it'll be like extra credit. But it'll give you an idea of the kinds of things I'm looking for, okay? So the next one will count. That'll probably be due Sunday or Monday by midnight. I know that doesn't give you a lot of time. And then there will be another one next week because I have to do attendance stuff.